Hello all and welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida. This is a brief companion video to my recent one on the Florida connections of the Abraham Lincoln Assassination Conspirators. This is one of the occasional videos I make that covers supplementary material that I use in a regular video. This has included the General Dynamics space cards that were placed in a time capsule buried at Kennedy Space Center years ago, and the architectural drawings of St. Augustine's historic Jimenez Facio house. Documents such as these deserve a more complete look than I give them in the main videos, as they represent more than just a basic document, such as a booklet or a letter. For example, simply calling this a photo album does it a disservice. The album was compiled late in the summer of 1865 by Colonel Arnold A. Rand, retired Union officer of the 4th Cavalry Regiment of Massachusetts Volunteers, and an early collector of Civil War images. Rand was the son of Edward Sprague and Elizabeth Arnold Rand, and was born in Boston on March 25, 1837. He was of the 8th generation of his family in Massachusetts. While it has just 40 pages, it represents just a small fraction of Rand's photographic collection. He represents the keen interest surrounding documenting the Civil War and Lincoln's assassination. Many of the images taken during the war and afterwards were made into prints that were sold to the general public. Coincidentally, the war took place at the point where photography had developed into a reasonably simple process, still done almost entirely by professionals, but inexpensive paper prints were available and families were able to afford photos of their family. The war provided yet another subject for photographers, so men like Alexander Gardner headed out to the battlefields, equipped with portable darkrooms, all the many chemicals needed, and dozens of fragile glass plates. Rand would buy many Civil War prints, but he'd also acquire the original and unique photographic glass plate negatives. In 1879, 14 years after the war, he and General Albert Ordway purchased 7,000 different views and portraits made during the American Civil War and its aftermath. Many represented the original glass plate negatives made under the supervision of Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner. Over the years, the collection would pass through several other hands until 1943, when the Library of Congress purchased it. The acquisition included 10,000 original glass plate negatives and film copy negatives. These would make up the bulk of the library's Civil War glass negatives and related prints collection. Rand's photo album wasn't part of the library's acquisition, and instead would find itself becoming part of the George Eastman House collection. The album contains early prints of Alexander Gardner's photos of the prisoners, including the hanging of 4 of the conspirators. The prints are in excellent condition, with the ones of the hanging especially noteworthy, as those were made well before the negatives suffered cracking and other deterioration, which is seen in many of the extant prints of this event. All of the pages are cut from their original binding. I'm going to slowly go through the images. There are 28 pages that are sequentially numbered from 2069 to 2096, and there's an additional 12 pages of images which Rand placed on the back of some of the numbered pages. The album begins with a view of Ford's Theater, the scene of the first presidential assassination in U.S. history. Images 2 and 3 are of conspirator Samuel Arnold, who was sentenced to life imprisonment and jailed at Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas. These images were made by Alexander Gardner, as are the rest of the following conspirators' photos. Image 4 shows Howard's stable, where John Wilkes Booth hired the horse he used to get to Ford's Theater and to escape. Images 5 and 6 are of George Atzerodt, who was executed. Image 7 is the first of the execution scenes at the Washington Arsenal, also photographed by Gardner. It shows the empty scaffold. Images 8 and 9 are of David Harold, who was also executed. Image 10 is the second execution scene with the prisoners on the scaffold while their death warrant is being read. Images 11 and 12 show Michael O'Loughlin, who received a life sentence and was sent to the Dry Tortugas. He would die there of yellow fever after a couple years. Image 13 shows the prisoners being prepared for their hanging. Images 14 through 17 are of Lewis Powell, here identified as Lewis Payne, an alias he used. Powell is the main subject of my recent video. His manic and nearly fatal attack on Secretary of State William Seward and 4 members of his household was the most brutal of the case, other than the Lincoln's assassination. He was put to death as well. Image 18 shows the nooses being placed over the heads of the 4 prisoners. Image 19 and 20 are of Edward Spangler, who was sentenced to Fort Jefferson for 6 years for holding on to Booth's horse while he killed the president. Along with the 2 other surviving convicted conspirators, he was pardoned by President Johnson. Image 21 is Gardner's photo several minutes after the execution occurred and the bodies had stilled. Images 22 through 24 are photos of an unnamed man labeled as arrested on suspicion of being a conspirator. He's actually João M. Celestino, a Portuguese ship captain who had a schooner and valuables confiscated by the U.S. in 1864 for running a blockade of the Confederacy. He hated William Seward, whom he blamed for his losses. The night of the assassination, he was heard to say that he wanted to kill Secretary Seward. Celestino was arrested and jailed until it was shown that he wasn't the attacker. Image 25 is the only other perspective of the execution scene that Gardner took, showing the Arsenal buildings and part of the crowd prior to the proceedings. Images 26 and 27 are of another man who, along with Celestino, became known as a fake conspirator. Unnamed in the album, he was Ernest Hartman Richter, and was arrested in his home in Germantown, Maryland, when detectives found his cousin, conspirator George Atzerodt, sleeping there. Richter made the mistake of trying to protect his cousin by telling investigators that Atzerodt wasn't there. He was imprisoned, photographed by Alexander Gardner, and eventually released. Image 28 shows the open graves and the pine coffins of the 4 prisoners, with George Atzerodt still hanging from the scaffold on the far left. This is the last of the numbered pages. You can see that the page was bound on the left, while all the following pages were bound on the right. Image 29 is actually 7 images, and are all publicity photos of John Wilkes Booth, the famous actor and the assassin of President Lincoln. Image 30 is another photo of Booth, along with a drawing of him in Ford's Theater with the devil encouraging him to murder the president. Image 31 is a drawing of the side of the scaffold showing the 2 soldiers underneath, ready to knock out the supports for the floor above, which will drop the prisoners to their death. Image 32 is an enlargement of Image 21 showing the executed prisoners. Image 33 is 2 copies of the wanted poster for Lincoln's assassins. Image 34 shows a drawing of the capture of David Harold and the attempt to smoke Booth out of a barn. Image 35 is the following scene, showing Booth inside the barn at the moment he's fatally shot by a Union soldier. Image 36 shows Mary Surratt's boarding house in Washington, where it's known that the conspirators met. Image 37 is of David Harold's house. Image 38 shows the house and outbuildings where Harold and Booth were captured. Image 39 is of Mary Surratt, convicted of being one of the conspirators and the first woman executed by the U.S. Image 40 is the final photo print and is Mary Surratt's son, who was thought to be one of the conspirators, but was the only one who escaped. He'd be captured a couple years later, and his trial resulted in a hung jury, and so he was set free. I hope this record of Colonel Arnold Rand's photographic album is informative and helpful. As someone who has also collected thousands of documents, I understand Rand's motivation and his interest. Saving the original plate negatives was a remarkable act, as today, 150 years later, we still have invaluable images of the First War documented by photography. While photographers such as Gardner only arrived after the battle was over, they were able to document the aftermath and helped people to understand that war was not romantic. Indeed, it was violent and harrowing. Sadly, the reality hasn't slowed war at all. Thank you for watching this video. I create regular videos on Florida's tourism history. This one was a special case, but if you watched the previous video, I talk about several of the convicted Lincoln conspirators and how they were connected to Florida and its modern tourism history. Stingray Tom's Florida, traveling through time around the Sunshine State.